That we led with this afternoon, the head of the nation's domestic intelligence agencies predicted a terrorist attack in Australia in the next year. I was joined a short time ago by the chair of that committee, the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security, where the ASIO boss was appearing, Senator James Paterson, and I asked him what he made of those comments. Was he surprised by how blunt the ASIO director was?
Mike Burgess was very direct and very honest, as he always is when he appears before the committee and before the Parliament. But it was very sobering advice to hear him reiterate that the terrorism threat level in Australia is probable, and to say in plain language what that means is that ASIO's assessment is that a terrorist attack in Australia is likely within the next 12 months. Of course, everyone is working to prevent that from happening: ASIO, the AFP, state police forces and others. And we've had a pretty good track record in Australia of preventing serious and mass casualty events. But as Mike Burgess pointed out, in the last 12 months, there were 2 terrorist attacks in Australia. That resulted in the loss of life. But
if ASIO is predicting an attack within the next 12 months, why aren't there any arrests being made if they're aware of that threat?
Well, in evidence both by ASIO and the AFP before the committee this morning, they detailed quite a number of arrests and other interventions by agencies to prevent attacks, to disrupt them, to dissuade people from going down that pathway. The AFP said that in the last 12 months there have been 26 arrests. 4 of those were for what's being called ideologically motivated extremism, for want of a better term, those far-right white nationalist extremists, and the remaining 22 were for the traditional terrorist threats we're more familiar with in this country of the Islamist persuasion. So there is a lot happening, and not all of it is visible to us, not all of it is in the public domain, but it's very much a big focus for our police forces and our security agencies.
When the Director General refers to an attack happening in the next 12 months, is he referring to ideologically motivated terrorism, the far-right extremists, or is he talking about religiously motivated extremists?
I asked him that question directly, and he said it could be either. The way in which he categorises the current threat environment, which the AFP agrees with, is that the fastest form of growing threat is the ideologically motivated threats, but that the principal remaining threat is the religiously motivated. So in simple terms, the Islamist danger is the one that is the greatest, but unfortunately the far-right terrorist threat has been growing and is an increasing concern.
Senator Paterson, is part of this the ASIO boss saying to government, we need resources, we need additional resources? Of course, it is the budget cycle. Is that part of the message here?
Well, the Director General did note that there is a proposal before government for consideration for extra funding for ASIO, but the record will also show that funding for ASIO is higher than it has ever been in our history, and has been very generously funded to meet this, unfortunately, very serious threats that we face, not just in this counter-terrorism space, but in the realms of espionage and foreign interference as well. And commensurate with that increase in resources that ASIO has obtained are increases in powers that the Parliament has granted ASIO. And so always we're mindful of the requests from agencies for more support. We take that very seriously, and if it is necessary to meet the challenges that we face, I have no doubt it'll be granted.
To return to where we began and that warning of an attack in 12 months in the next year, are you confident that our agencies have the right personnel and technology to combat any threat?
The evidence before the committee so far is that they have extensive powers, that they take this issue seriously, they have extensive resources, but that further fine-tuning might be necessary to provide the best assurance of protection that we can. The Director General made the point that ASIO is not all-seeing and all-knowing, and probably in a liberal democratic society we wouldn't like a security agency to be all-seeing and all-knowing, and so they can never give us a 100% guarantee that these things will never happen. But what they can do is give us the best assurance possible that if there is violent extremism brewing in our country, that they will track it, they will monitor it, and they will intervene when appropriate and when lawful to prevent it. And so far they have a pretty good track record of doing so, but that doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels or be complacent in any sense.
And finally, on another matter, we saw on Anzac Day that message from the Secretary of Home Affairs, Mike Pezzullo, warning about the drumbeat of war. Were you surprised by that sort of intervention from a senior public servant?
Mike Pizzullo has a particular way of words, a very clear way of communicating that no doubt does generate attention from time to time. I think it's worth bearing in mind a couple of things. Firstly, it's the job of public servants like Mike Pizzullo to implement the government's agenda, and it's the job of popularly elected politicians to set that agenda. And I've got no doubt that he does that in a very dedicated and very successful way. He's a highly accomplished public servant. I think we do need to be aware of the danger of conflict in our region. It is not as remote as it might once have been. It's not as remote as we would like it to be. And what the government is doing is investing very heavily in our defence, $270 billion over the next decade, or 2% of GDP, because we want to be able to have the most credible deterrent possible to discourage anyone who wants to engage in conflict, whether it's in our region or elsewhere in the world.
Senator Paterson, Chair of the Parliamentary Committee on Intelligence and Security, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Kieran. Thank you.